Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by congressional reporter Kate Scanlon. Kate, we've had some jockeying. It's an unusual situation. So you have Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, really going after Florida Governor Ron Desantis. Neither of them are openly running for president, but it's also sort of like a shadow campaign for president that the two of them are running against each other, while they're both each being deferential to the current leaders of their respective parties. What's the latest volley that Newsom has fired at DeSantis?
Well, as you put it, it does seem to be sort of a shadow campaign between these two governors. Gavin Newsom this week put out a tweet that he was going to donate $100,000 to Ron DeSantis' general election opponent,
right.
Charlie Crist, and it really is an escalation of this feud we've seen bubble between them for a long time.
So DeSantis is often going around the country he's campaigning for Republican candidates in the midterms while also running for re-election himself in what has historically been sort of a swing state, even though Republicans have won most of the recent elections, though not by huge margins. And Gavin Newsom is clearly kind of positioning himself as a national Democratic leader, while they're both kind of hanging back and letting Joe Biden and Donald Trump seem to be still considered the presumptive. It's kind of an odd dynamic.
Yes, it is, exactly. I think both of their ambitions, though, are pretty obvious
right.
in all of their exchanges, as you've alluded to. And it is interesting, too, because they've each kind of been able to use the other state as like a boogeyman for whatever ideology they say they're opposed to. So, Governor Newsom has hit Governor Desantis for some more conservative policies in Florida and vice versa in California. And so you often kind of see, as you noted, Florida is kind of becoming more of a red state. It's been a purple state for a long time, and Ron DeSantis is kind of both a product of and contributor to that because he is popular in the state. So it is kind of interesting to see this kind of like de facto shadow presidential campaign while both being deferential to, in Gavin Newsom's case, the president of the United States, and in Ron DeSantis' case, the former president.
Right. It's really kind of an interesting tightrope to walk.
Yes.
So this all comes in the context of now Governor DeSantis knows who his general election opponent will be. Florida primaries have happened. Senator Marco Rubio knows who his Democratic challenger is going to be, although I think there was a little less suspense on that front. Talk about how this is set up a general election contest in Florida.
So the general election contest in Florida is looking pretty red in both of those races. The Senate race a little less so. The Senate race is looking a little tighter. There was a surprise poll that showed Val Demings kind of in striking distance of Marco Rubio. That was kind of a little bit of an outlier, but is kind of also a warning sign that race might be a little closer than some had anticipated it would be. Ron DeSantis, by similar polls, is leading Charlie Crist by a much larger margin. So that race is a little less interesting, and that's going to be an interesting campaign because Florida Democrats would love to defeat Ron DeSantis, and as Charlie Crist has put it, end his presidential campaign before it begins. That's going to be an uphill battle for them to do, particularly now that they've chosen Charlie Crist, who by some metrics, I think a lot of voters did see him as the more electable option in that primary in order to do that, but at the same time, he now has to go convince general election voters about who he is and what he believes, because they know him as someone who's switched parties in his career, and there are some questions there. And so whether he can mobilize Democratic voters the same way that some other candidates in some other states are going to be able to do still remains to be seen.
Right, because Charlie Crist was governor of Florida, but he was a Republican when he was governor of Florida. He tried to run for Senate against Marco Rubio. He wanted the Republican nomination for Senate, did not get it, became an independent and ran against Marco Rubio anyway, lost, became a Democrat, got elected to Congress. It's just a very interesting dynamic there.
It's a very interesting resume he has. I think he's something of a known quantity as as a person and as an individual to Florida voters, but not so much in terms of like what his ideology is. I think people kind of see him as a little bit of a flip-flopper, because there have been some political journeys he's taken. So, he's really going to have to convince his own base and win over swing voters in order to have a shot at this.
It's also an interesting test for Desantis in the way he's chosen to govern the state, because he has pretty much run Florida as if it's a reliably red state. It is, even though Republicans have had the edge in most close races, it's not historically been that red. It's not Alabama. He won by less than a point, albeit in a bad year for Republicans. So if DeSantis can do this and can win handily, it would validate his approach to this. But if it gets close, even if he doesn't lose, if it gets close, it might send message to other Republicans.
Yeah, Florida is not a typical southern state. It's a little more multifaceted. It's a little less religious than some of its neighbors, for example. Right. There's different dynamics like that. It has been a very purple state in recent contests. The 2000 election is a great example of Florida being a purple state. That has started to change a little bit, but whether that can continue is obviously something Governor DeSantis still has to accomplish.
So another interesting set of primaries took place in New York, and one of the people trying to be a kingmaker of sorts, if that is the appropriately gendered phrase to use, is Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a really important figure in progressive politics. She endorsed in a number of the primaries, and you've written about this. She had kind of a mixed track record in terms of her preferred candidates get across the finish line.
She does have kind of a mixed track record, and a big part of why that's the case is a lot of times she's challenging incumbent lawmakers when they have a progressive primary challenger. So while members of Congress losing in primaries has become more common this cycle, that's actually kind of a big lift. It's not like a frequent occurrence. And so her record is a little bit more mixed than maybe some of her counterparts, because she is willing to go a bit on those long shot candidates, just as she was.
That's how she got in,
when she got in, right. She defeated a longtime lawmaker who was seen as a potential successor to Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. So she took out a really big establishment figure. And so she tries to help these candidates who are trying to do similar. And, that's a mixed bag. So she had some hits and some misses this week, including in her home state this time.
Because there's been some attempts to sort of have a progressive or a liberal version of what the Tea Party did in the Republican primaries, and they haven't quite had that same success rate yet.
Exactly. A good example of that, kind of the inverse of that, was in Texas this cycle, where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez backed a primary challenger, Jessica Cisneros, to Henry Cuellar, who is seen as the last anti-abortion Democrat in the House. So a lot of progressives really wanted to take him out and replace him. That was their rematch election, and that failed for the second time. So it is kind of a heavy lift, but she's still trying.
So AOC leads the squad, but you, Julie Grace, and Virginia are our squad on Capitol Hill.
Exactly.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
You can read Kate and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.